Okay, so we're gonna focus on one opinion in dealing with a question that comes up in the parsha. We have the famous "Va'ahavta l'reacha Kemocha," right? Va'ahavta l'reacha Kemocha, and the question is, right? What does that mean? Right? It's in Vayikra Yudtes Yudches "Va'ahavta l'reacha Kemocha." Oh, Rabbi Akiva says it's a klal gadol v'Torah, and we even sing it. But that's exactly where the problem comes in. Because Rabbi Akiva, there's a famous case about the two people who are in the desert, and they have one flask of water. And if one person drinks the water, will be able to reach civilization and survive. If they share the water, neither of them will survive. So the question is, what is done with the water? So there, Rabbi Akiva's shita is, right? V'chei achicha imoch, your brother lives with you, implying chayecha kodmin, even Barry, right? Chayecha kodmin l'chaye chavercha. Your life comes first before that of your friend. So then how can you reconcile v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which seems to imply that you are equal, right? L'reacha kamocha, just like you as him. So then how can there be an idea of chayecha kodmin, of you come first? So I found a mimer on this in this journal called Asya. It's brought up by this Professor Steinberg from Shaarei Tzedek, about a lot of things with medical halacha. So this got into this because of the question of, you putting yourself at risk for somebody else, and a lot of questions about that. He brings here many, many approaches to try and resolve this question. Okay, so I refer you to it if you like to see all the different approaches. We're going to look at the Chasam Sofer, because I really found the Chasam Sofer first in Shul, and I was just trying to find it online, and that was where I found this mimer. So here's what the Chasam Sofer says in Toras Moshe. Right? He says, Kivan shechayecha kodmin, if Rabbi Akiva says clearly in the Gemara, your life comes first, how can you fulfill loving your fellow Jew as yourself? So he answers like this. He says, Chayecha Kodmin applies to things in our, so to speak, physical world, such as the water in the desert. One person is going to drink the water and survive. You have the water right now. You don't have to give it to the other person. You don't have to share it with the other person and both die, which was the other sheet in the Gemara, right? But you drink. But that's in the physical world. We'll try to explain why the differentiation. But in the spiritual world, in the eternal world, the Hainu, which he refers to as Limud Torah, says when it comes to the idea of learning Torah, chayav l'lamed acherim, you must teach other people. You can't say, I come first, I can't waste my time explaining this to you or learning this with you, etc. Afilu hu mevatel atzma milimudo, even if that means you're going to stop the learning that you would be doing yourself lechatchila. Mikol makom chayav l'lmod im acherim. Nonetheless, you have to learn with other people. Al-Kain Amar Rabbi Akiva, so he's medayek in Rabbi Akiva, he says, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. That V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is in the world of Torah, Torah learning, Torah teaching. He says, Be'inyan libud Torah klal gadol le'ov chavero kamocha. Okay, so that's the Chasam Sofer. Now I'll point out that Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe asks some seemingly obvious questions on this, which gets you to think that the Chasam Sofer must have taken this into account. Because Rav Moshe says, Dvarv temuhin ma'od. His words are very, very surprising. It's clear that when it comes to Torah, your Torah comes before someone else's. It's clear cases in the Gemara, Kiddushim. It says, even of the Torah of your son, right? If it's you or your son to learn Torah, you come first. He says, certainly you come first then more than the Limud Torah of other people. It talks, the Rambam brings down that your son's Torah comes before your grandson's Torah in terms of supporting that your son instead of someone else's son. So he says we see all sorts of laws, right, of who comes first, and the idea of chayecha kodmin, you or those close to you come first before someone else's. And he says it's even more so than in tzedakah. He says, because in tzedakah, let's say your bread comes before someone else having bread. But if you don't have steak and your fellow Jew doesn't have bread, so his bread comes before your steak. Okay? But he says in Torah, he says it can't be, right, that if a person knows, let's say, Seder Noshim, and he wants to learn now Seder Nezikin, and somebody else comes and says, you know what, I don't know Seder Noshim, learn that with me. He says, you come first to learn a new Seder that you haven't yet learned, right? Rather than learning with someone else that Masechta or that Seder that you already learned. Okay, so it seems, somewhat heavy-hitting questions. So I'm not obviously coming to speak for any of them to do. I'll give an approach based on something that I heard, perhaps, right, that could be miyashev, but I'm not at the level to be miyashev anything between the Chasam Sofer and Moshe Feinstein. But it's kind of like this. It was based on, as a very special Rav of Nosson Bar Chaim, he was the head of the Beis Medrash in Machon Lev for decades. And he was once talking, I think it was just with me, about a question. He said, let's say a person, we know the Gemara says that if there's a woman drowning in the water and a person says, well, I can't save her because I don't want to touch her, that's called a chassid shota. So there was someone, he remained anonymous in the discussion, he said, Utainid, well, let's say I see a Jewish woman drowning in the sea of assimilation, right? And I can rescue her, but in order to do so, I have to give her a hug, I have to dance with her, right? Would I not be a chassid shota not to do such a thing? So I remember, so he asked me, how would you answer that? So eventually I waited for his answer, which was like this. He said, in the physical world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us certain defined quantities and properties that if this woman goes down under the water, she dies. If I pull her out of the water, she lives. That is something that I can deal with in terms of cause and effect that we see right before us. But in terms of how a person is going to get close to Hashem, that's really up to Hashem. Right? In other words, it's not something I can make someone else do. So therefore, the only tools in my toolbox are the ones that are allowed by the Torah. If it comes to hit that wall and the person's telling me, it'll just draw me so close to Torah if you do this thing that's aser, I have to turn to Hashem and say, Ribono Shel Olam, you take the keys, right? In other words, I can't go there, you said, but it's not up to me as to who's going to get close to Torah, right? It's up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's up to the heart. So it could be that also the goal in learning Torah is for a person to connect with Torah, to absorb Torah, to get close to Hashem, right? And this certainly the Hasidic view is that the goal of learning Torah is dveikus in Hashem. And therefore, you don't know exactly what and how is going to make you successful in that. The whole idea of success in learning Torah and the endeavor of learning Torah is not just a simple fact of remembering facts and knowledge or database, but having the Torah become part of you and drawing close to Hashem. Right? Just like we saw with Moshe Rabbeinu, it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu taught him and he forgot. Taught him and he forgot, taught him and he forgot, eventually gave him the Torah b'matana, right? To teach you that we have to do our trying with Torah, but the gift of Torah, so to speak, comes from Hashem. That's why we really don't believe in the existence of a Gadol b'Yisrael whose midos are corrupt. Because he may know a lot of knowledge in the database, but to be a person who's truly absorbed and is living Torah, Hashem won't give that to such a person. Right? That is something which is a level beyond. So therefore, perhaps what the Chasam Sofer is saying is the following. it's not as black and white here in terms of learning Torah as it is with the idea of who gets the bottle of water in the desert. There also we're dealing with facts. Dehydrated person, if he can get this much hydration, that's the way the Gemara lays out the case. It's given as a vadai that if this one person drinks the bottle of water, he will reach civilization and survive. Mepharshim talk about what if it's only a suffix and a doubt. So there, in terms of dealing with these things, chayecha kodmi. But here, your spiritual life, your chayi netzach, as the Chasam Sofer calls it, how do you know that by ignoring this person's request to learn something with him that you've already learned, you say, I really wanted to go on to something new. I really don't want to learn that with you. How do you know that that is going to further your success in Torah, which again is a spiritual success, not an intellectual success? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give you the ability to learn Torah and do, right? For example, it says Chasidim Rishonim, right? They used to wait an hour before davening, hour after davening, and the Gemara asks, wait a second, so when would 3 hours or Sachakol with each davening or something? I thought it was 3 hours. It was before, 3 hours after. And then they asked, Torah samech miskayemes. So what's with their Torah? So this HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives that to them, enables them in that shorter time, right? Because of their avoda and those things and preparation for the tefillah and the dvekus that they have, they're able to achieve in Torah in a different way. So it could be here, right, that this is what's meant. Here it's not an either or that's straight in that way. The famous story about the Chibiner of Yesheva.
What's this discussion different from the case of, say, a Rav who could learn more, maybe even become Rabbi Akiva Eger or something like that, or giving his time to the tzibur?
Correct. This was asked to the Panovzher Rav. The Panovzher Rav was a giant, but during the years since he founded the yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, for sure, he was already fundraising in South Africa when the yeshiva was in Panovich. Right, he spent a huge amount of time and travel fundraising, to the extent that they asked the Satmar Rebbe if he thought there was life on the moon. And he says, no. They said, how do you know? He says, if there were, the Panovzher Rav would have gone there and made a parlor meeting. Right? So he said, right. So somebody apparently told him and said, if you would just separate and learn, you would be another Chazon Ish. But he says, no, I need to create a yeshiva that will produce more and more. So you're right, that is something. And it doesn't mean necessarily that his Torah suffered because of that, in terms of the great picture of Torah and the dveikus that a person gets from Torah. So
certainly all the zchuyot,
correct,
from all the Torah that his Talmidim learned.
Right, which is all there. Now again, it doesn't mean also that a person can just say, okay, I'll donate for other people to learn, that takes care of it. It's a fascinating thing Rav Moshe Shapiro told us. He said there's a famous story about Rav Aaron Kotler. He says, but I don't believe it. Okay, it's nice to hear sometime, and he said this with great confidence. What's the story? The story is Rav Aaron Kotler also spent a lot of time raising money and also doing crazy things to save Jews from either the camps or DP camps, including meeting with a mafia boss, right? He said he would meet with anyone. The mafia boss was able to help some Jews get out of Italy. Right? And that was what he did. So the story is that he was staying at the home of one of his donors in Manhattan, and the donor's son comes home after a day of work. He kicks off his shoes, he takes up the newspaper, starts reading the sports section, and Rav Aaron, who was very sharp, he says, what are you doing? He says, you could be learning Torah now. So the fellow said, my father told me, you told him that those who support Torah get reward just like those who learn Torah in Olam Haba. So according to the story, I'm not talking about your Olam Haba, I'm talking about your Olam Hazeh. Right? In other words, it's much more enjoyable life to be learning Torah than to read the sports section. But Rav Moshe said he doesn't believe that because he doesn't believe Rav Aaron would countenance even the theory that a person that somehow supporting Torah gives you a free check to be Mevatel Zman or to do this or to do that or everything. That's a very dangerous type of thing. It's like I'll write the check and then I'll do what I have to. So here again, it could very well be that what the Chasam Sofer says, and he's not talking about not learning or learning. He's talking about learning with other people. Even Reb Moshe also, by the way, he had a famous psak. He said that people, just like you donate meiser from your money, someone who's involved in learning should devote meiser of their time to learn with others, to be working in kiruv, to do something like that. So it could be the Chabina Rav who lived near here in Rechavia. So there's a famous story that one Shabbos afternoon he was taking his nap, and there was a knocking on the door. And he gets up, he opens the door, there's a little kid there. And he says, yes, and he says, I have a test on Sunday, and my father can't learn with me, so he said I should ask the Rav. So, so he sat down with the boy, and they were learning Elam Metzias or whatever, and he learned it with him. And he said, number one, he understood things in that sugya that he never understood before, and he learned it so many times. And number two, he realized that the boy simply assumed that the Tribuna Rav wouldn't be sleeping on Shabbos. And from then, he actually stopped taking the nap. Okay, so again, he grew from that as well. That's why it seems to me that it's not so black and white in terms of the ruchnius as it is in the physical. That may be the Chasam Sofer's divining. Anyway, once we've discovered this principle of the Chasam Sofer, that to a certain extent, when it comes to Torah, when it comes to ruchnius, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha means it's not the world of just me first, but it is a world in which it's true. Perhaps in order to help somebody else, because his need is equal to my need, something will go down in my spiritual world. So another example of this is someone not of Hasidic tendencies, as you might call, said, I heard something in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, I can't believe that he would have said. I said, what did you hear? Somebody said that he says, when it says that Avram Avinu was receiving Nevuah from Hashem, and then he sees these apparent Arabs out there in the desert, and he brings them in to give them food and drink, etc. From there we learn, Gadol achnasas archim yoser mikabalas b'nei shechina. Receiving guests is greater than even receiving the divine presence. So he said, I heard the Baal Shem Tov said that means even if it's gonna, take down your ruchnis. So I said, I'll look it up, I'll find it, right? So it wasn't hard to find. There's a collection, Baal Shem Tov al Torah. Again, the Baal Shem Tov didn't write Sfarim. The only writings we have from him are letters to Talmidim. But the close Talmidim, real time, who learned from him, wrote down the first was the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, and his grandson, the Degel Machne Ephraim, and others. So in the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, he says like this. He says, Gedola achnasas archim me'akbalos pnei ashchina, Shamati Mimori. I heard from my teacher, my master, the Baal Shem Tov. Biur, what does this mean? Gedolach nasasarchim me'akbalos pnei ashchina. Right, so he says, Ha'ole shilifami machnasas orchim u'bitul Torah. In other words, sometimes your achnasas orchim is going to bring a level of bitul Torah into your life. Oh, sipure lashon hara. Or these guests might start chatting a bit of lashon hara, right? So he says, "Mikol makom gedol achnasas orchim." Nonetheless, we say that this greatness of achnasas orchim will be. Okay, this doesn't mean you should let dangerous people into your house, etc. But let's say, imagine some theoretical home where all you do is, sing Zmiris and say deep divrei Torah, and the head of the household says, an hour shir on Minchas Chinuch every week. And here you get a couple guys that, I don't know, they want to talk baseball or schmooze around, and meanwhile one of them is complaining about his neighbor, things like this. He says, is true. In other words, obviously, the Chavetz Chaim gives us the playbook as to how to try to get people away from speaking Lashon Hara and how to protect yourself if you heard Lashon Hara. But don't start shutting out people who need a place to be, because you'll say, this is going to impinge on my ruchnis. Right? Again, always within limit, and the person can ask, and always in terms what you're exposing your kids to, what you're exposing your family to. But neto, as they say in Israel, right, it could be in a certain theoretical household that there will not be as much Torah and the Kedusha and the discussions and in the environment when these people are there. Nonetheless, right, here we don't say Chayecha Kodmim, just like the Chasam Sofer said in terms of Torah.
What's the neto?
Neto means bottom line. They call the net instead of the gross. I don't know, that's an Israeli expression. Yeah. Now, the third example is one I saw in a shir they printed up from Reb Shol Alter Shlita. Reb Shol Alter is called the Ger Rosh Yeshiva. He was the son, is the son of the previous Ger Rebbe, the Pnei Menachem, and he has his own kehillah. And he said on Parshas Tazria the following, in Parshas Mitzorah last week. It tells us that the Mitzorah comes for his tahara. The Mitzorah comes to go through the purification process after he's done tshuva, etc. And the pasuk says, "Vehemid hakohen hametaher," the kohen who's going to be purifying him, es ha'ish hamitaher, the person who's going to become Torah v'osam and everything he brought with him, lifnei Hashem Pesach Oel Moed, before Hashem in the gateway to Oel Moed. Where's this lifnei Hashem? So Rashi brings down from the Gemara that in Bayesheni, this was the area called Shar Nikanor, Nikanor's gate. V'lo ba'azara atzmo, the Mitzorah couldn't come into the actual Azara of the Beis HaMikdash because he's still not finished his Tahara process. But he does have to have the special putting the dam and the shemen and these things on his thumb of his hand, the thumb of his toe, so he would stand there in the gate and stick them in. Okay, now, how is he able to stand in the gate? So the Gemara says, right, that it was not miskadesh. That when they built the Beis HaMikdash, instead of having that gateway, the inside of that gateway, be kadosh with the kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, they left it unkadosh. Why? Tosfos says, because the Mitzorah, he's got to be standing there. We don't want him to get rained on if it's raining. We don't want him to get, too hot if it's a hot sunny day. So we let him stand inside that courtyard, inside that gateway. So here Reb Shol Alter brought that as the same type of example. He says the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata is connected to the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mala, meaning the reality, the physical reality of the Beis HaMikdash corresponds to something in the spiritual Beis HaMikdash. Here what it's telling us is they understood that minimizing the amount of Kedusha to a certain extent, this gateway is something that could have become Kadosh with the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash. Nonetheless, it was left unkadosh in order to help this person who's coming to finish his tshuva process and to be able to enter in, to make him feel cared for, right? Not to have him out there in the weather like, a wild dog or something. So therefore, we're supposed to learn from that the same principle. Correct. A certain limitation sometime of what you could do because you're taking others in account. Correct. Now, Reb Shol Alter just added on, finished with this, he asked an interesting question. He said, okay, but why couldn't they simply build some kind of little roof or canopy sticking out from the outside? In other words, let the Shar Nikanor have the Kedusha inside and build some kind of gagon, as they call it, right? Some kind of little roof outside for Mitzrayim to stand, right? And then they would stick their thumbs in the cavity, so to speak, of the Shar Nikanor. So there he says, no, there also, we want the Mitzorah to be able to take the steps to get as close to the Kedusha as he can. Meaning this idea that he can walk into the gate and stick his thumbs into the Azara, right, as opposed to saying, no, you can't even come into the gate, but we made this little booth for you sticking out over here so you don't get rained on. He said that also is a message in terms of how to welcome the person in who's trying to get close. Right? So I think that all those three examples really follow the same theme. And this is the idea that we have to think. Sometimes people get very selfish about their ruchnius. I always repeat, something really shocked me. Someone I taught, one of the schools, this young lady came over to me after class. She says, why are we against intermarriage? I was like, what? She says, no, listen. She says, who intermarries? Jews who aren't from, right? Okay, I guess by definition. So if all the Jews who aren't from intermarry, then they'll only be from Jews and Mashiach will come. I was like gaping like a goldfish. Like I wasn't. So again, my answer at the time wasn't that good. I said, I said, I don't know, if your brother stops putting on his tefillin, do you like introduce him to a nice Catholic girl and say, here, I want you to disappear? But the very concept is wrong. Every Jew Hashem created, Hashem wants, and we're supposed to care for. And it's not this type of game that I'm trying to get to the goodies at the end and got to get rid of the dead weight so I can get there. That's an entirely false picture. That's what the Chasam Sofer is trying to negate, and the Baal Shem Tov in that piece, and the Tosfos there also. So I believe may Hashem help us be able to all get where we're supposed to go in the best way and care for each other.
Amen.